we want to do the station ID now, or do you just want to always just do that same thing?
Yeah, we'll just do the same thing.
Great.
Just be a file, just drop it in.
Yep, perfect.
Okay.
So we technically should not go to in exactly 30 minutes, because we're gonna have a total of like 2 minutes of music and station ID.
Yeah, so it'd be like 28.
Or 3 minutes, maybe get us 27, or whatever you want.
Okay,
2 minutes.
2 minutes, well,
Yeah,
40, we're not gonna use all 40 seconds of the music, you know? We're probably gonna start talking after about 5 or 6 seconds. And
okay,
have the music just fade down maybe after 10 seconds. And then, same thing for the end. I mean, you talk, you say goodbye, and the music might run for another 30 seconds, and that's to help them if they have anything that they need to fill time with.
great.
So that's good. So that would be about, at most.
I think just 28 minutes, I think, would work,
And then, let's see, what else? Is there anything else that we need to give them space for? I don't think so.
do we want to add, like, just for that last one only, just on the last one, like, support your local business, mom and pop shop, do we want to just throw in clips of that?
No, because then, you know, I think as a listener, I'd be thinking, oh, so they created a song for mom and pop, so they're gonna create a song for every episode.
I mean, I could.
Well, you probably could.
But I
But
won't.
will you? You won't. Okay, so then probably not. I would say no. Don't put an expectation in the listener's mind.
Great.
Okay, so let me, let me see. Okay, don't reset. Okay.
What do you got, 31?
Well, that's 31 seconds. So I'll just watch the time on this thing.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, you just can't do 28 seconds?
Yeah, for
flat?
some reason, I can't get this thing to set for some reason. It won't
Okay.
reset.
Looks like something from the 70s.
Huh? Yeah.
Is it?
It is. It is. Well, no, it's not from the 70s. I'd say it's probably from the 90s. You know, it's a pretty good little clock when it works. Because the thing I like about it is that it flashes. So when I'm not paying attention to the screen, flashing is my attention. Okay. Okay, you ready?
Wait, so we're not gonna be using this
No.
at all? So you'll have an idea of.
Right here.
You have a clock, I mean,
Uh-huh.
okay, so just give me a little bit of, like, when we're at like, when we're at like 28 minutes, just kind of give me like, so we know how to wind it down.
Okay, so in TV, time cues 1 minute, 30 seconds, out,
Okay,
okay?
1 minute. So basically, I'll just need the 1 minute sign.
Okay, all right. Okay, so, you ready? I mean, we're just gonna probably just get ready to talk up to it anyway, so. Okay, this is the slate for episode 2, Country Dog, City Dog.
All right, ready?
Mhm.
Hello, my name is Kevin Levy,
And I'm Don Merrill.
and this episode, we're gonna talk about how we can create trust amongst country and city folks.
Yeah, because there's a lot of mistrust in what is perceived, what is said, what is done, and it's a big topic. So it's nothing that we're gonna solve in one 30-minute conversation, but at least we can sort of crack the door open a little bit.
Exactly, I was just gonna say, we need to first off acknowledge that this is an extremely difficult topic. Trying to create trust and uniting a divide can almost seem impossible, but this is not just an Oregon thing. This goes from state to state. It's almost like we have two Americas, but I truly believe that there are many of us who have open minds and willing to try.
And, you know, I think something needs to be said about that, and that is the people who we think don't have open minds do think they have open minds.
Right.
And vice versa. You know, we may think, or certain groups may think, that they're just as open-minded as can be and can't understand why other people think that they're not. And that's part of the divide. That's part of the problem. So part of this conversation really is not looking at solutions necessarily, but looking at reasons for why there is not the kind of trust that there needs to be in order for us to be a nation where everybody can achieve.
Right, right. So, like, city folks might think, they just might think that people living out in the country are racist or ignorant, and some of those that live out in the city, that live out in the country, they might think that city folks are overly sensitive, woke elitists. Those are just stereotypes that rarely come true. The reality is, we are all the same. You might be surprised that city and rural share many of the same beliefs. Among many other things, we really believe that we want safe and crime-free communities, to be healthy in mind and in body, and to be financially prosperous. But how do we get there? That's often the difference.
You know, the Brookings Institution did a study about the urban and rural divide about 2 years ago, not very long ago. And they said that, you know, this binary-based narrative, which is binary is like one or the other, choose one or the other. This kind of narrative was bad because, you know, it sort of inflicted real damage on people in 4 ways. First, it prioritized political concerns of an imagined rural monolith and erased the needs of rural people of color, especially during the pandemic. Second, it fueled all these misconceptions about rural economies and you know, sort of devalued the importance of rural economies. Third, it sort of pushed forward this myth of place-based poverty, you know, that erases people living in a range of high poverty geographics. I mean, it's not, people are homeless in eastern and southern Oregon just like they're homeless in Portland.
Right.
And the last one was, you know, it ensured these kind of closed-minded attitudes. They kind of obscured effective policy and practice solutions for rural economic development. And one of the things that came up in a lot of conversations that I had with conservative politicians when I'm doing my interviews of politicians running for Oregon state office is they say that the policies in Portland are geared toward Portland. They're geared toward Eugene, they're geared toward Salem, but they're not really geared toward Bend or Pendleton, which make it very difficult for folks to have businesses, have livelihoods. Oregon used to be a state big in sawmills. It's like almost all the sawmills have closed. So this idea of devaluing the value of rural economies and rural lifestyles over an urban lifestyle has caused real damage, and the Brookings Institution pointed that out.
Sure, no, that totally makes sense. And you know, I've often wondered, like how can we create the trust? Like, who are the folks right now that automatically just love one another, that show respect towards everyone, regardless of the political party? And I'll tell you, like, in my view, they are the ones who do not take politics too seriously. They don't listen to political news stations, especially the opinionated political news stations, regardless if it's conservative or liberal. The ones that do not take politics seriously are the ones who are, in my view, more understanding, more able to respect and appreciate where both sides are coming from, and they get the viewpoints that others are sharing. They are the ones that I feel are more open-minded and at peace towards others.
You know, one of the things that both people who are living in, you know, stressful rural environment and a stressful urban environment, something that both groups can agree on that is needed is, for example, improved health care.
Absolutely.
Everybody needs improved health care. In a lot of the rural areas, there are not a lot of hospitals or medical facilities, or the facilities that are there are really understaffed and not adequate to serve the populations that they have. People have to travel for hours to get to a good hospital, especially if they have some kind of critical care need, and then they have to be medevaced, you know, to Portland or to one of the major urban centers with a big, you know, trauma center.
Right.
And that costs money. I mean, you know, for somebody who needs to get someplace fast because they're having a critical medical issue, it's a life and death decision, and it shouldn't be. Another thing I spoke about earlier about the employment and businesses and the ability of people to create livelihoods, it's the opportunity for people to be able to exist where they are. They've lived there their whole lives, and maybe they like living there. Maybe when they were children, or their parents were children, it was a great place to live. But now with the economy as it is, with the damage that COVID has done, a lot of those rural communities have just been decimated.
So how can we break this divide? How about connecting with local leaders? Ask about what their communities need most. Ask questions and listen. Don't rebuttal. In fact, how about road trips outside of your local area, outside of your comfort area? Meet friendly new faces. Ask about ways to support their local businesses. Listen to episode 1 if you want to learn more about that. Ask if you can attend a service. Once a strong bond of communication is created, then so is trust. Once trust is established, then things can get accomplished.
Kevin, okay, so I gotta go off book just for a second.
Yes.
So visit new places, meet new people. I absolutely get that. And that is what the subject of this is about. It's about people who have a different view of the world, engaging each other on a human level.
Sure.
I'm African American,
Mm-hmm.
and for me, going to a lot of places is just not safe.
Sure.
Not because everybody in that place hates me, but maybe because a few people in that place really don't want me there. I mean, it may not be anything as definitive as, straight up racism. I'll give it that. Let's say it's not straight up racism, but it might be, I remind people of something,
Sure.
and they don't like what I remind them of. And so, some of those folks may be perfectly comfortable dealing with me in a setting that's not their town.
Do you feel that racism plays a part in this divide?
There's a part of me that says, absolutely yes. But then there's another part of me that says, well, if I want to give, and everybody deserves the benefit of the doubt, if I wanted to give those folks the benefit of the doubt, then I would say, well, maybe they wouldn't call it racism.
Sure.
Maybe they would call it something else. Maybe they would call it, like I said, I remind them of something. Maybe it's a fear, of not knowing anybody like me, or maybe it's a fear of the reaction that they get from other people if they, were to engage me.
So you bring up a very important point, and so let me ask you, what do you feel could potentially be done to make you feel more comfortable about driving out to like a new community, or is that just not possible at this time?
I would expect that a lot of people who live in those communities that people I know might be hesitant to visit for those fears, for those same reasons. I would guess a lot of those people would be thinking, it's not my job to make him comfortable.
Sure.
It's not my job, and I get that. But what would I do? What could I do in and of myself to feel comfortable? Well, first of all, I feel like I'd have to have a good attitude.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if I go out to a place where, and I've got a chip on my shoulder, because of something that really doesn't have anything directly to do with any of those people, then I'm inviting a fight. I'm inviting one, But then, by the same token, I don't want to run into anybody like that either.
Right.
I don't want to run into anybody who has a chip on their shoulder for whatever reason, It's easy to fall back on the tropes. It's too easy, And tropes are easy because they don't really require a lot of work.
Mhm.
They don't really require a lot of thinking. They don't really require a lot of investment. I remember a quote from a former Supreme Court justice, I think it was Felix Frankfurter maybe, or maybe it was Brandeis. But it was a quote that said, you know, the sign of a good mind is being able to hold two conflicting thoughts in it at the same time.
Huh.
And my belief is that there are a lot of people in the country with good minds.
Right.
And so, but the trick is finding them.
Sure. Yeah, I feel conversations like should never put people on the defense and about their beliefs. Sometimes it's okay to ask questions and just listen and don't rebuttal. Don't try to prove why they're wrong and you're right. And you know, that will always be a failed attempt at uniting. Don't shame people in their political beliefs. It's okay if you love Obama. It's okay if you love Trump. Like in the end, we're all good people. If you show you care and you mean it, have compassion. And sometimes humor doesn't hurt a little bit itself too. But a good conversation that's meaningful is vital. And listening is just, it goes beyond words.
You know, I remember when the Tea Party was a big thing back in 2010. And there were all these questions about what did the Tea Partiers want? What did they feel that they weren't being heard?
Like
Right.
the freedom of their life and enjoyment without government involvement whatsoever.
So one of the things was, you know, they wanted constitutional limits, you know. They were overwhelmingly concerned with economic rather than social issues. There was a big thing to edit the Federal Reserve, audit the Federal Reserve, you know, because there again, it was an issue of how much accountability does the government have? Does the government have too much power, you know? Another thing was, you know, the Tea Partiers were like super Republicans. And, you know, for a lot of people, you know, that was bad news for the Obama administration, you know. There's been all kinds of books about angry white men and, you know, how you know, it's really hard for men to get work and women are outpacing men in college and so you have these podcasts of men who are sort of talking about, you know, reclaim your manhood and all this other stuff. And, you know, for a lot of people, that's very attractive because a lot of people do feel disenfranchised. They feel like what defined them as a man, as a family provider, as a protector,
Right.
has sort of been taken away from them. you
Sure.
know? And that's part of the divide too, because when you have people who are feeling that way, and then they look to other groups of people and feel like those groups of people, you know, they can get driver's licenses without being citizens, or they can go to school without having to pay the full price of tuition that somebody else has to pay, or they get free medical care or whatever. Those folks can feel really, really angry that things just don't seem fair. And the society is sort of structured in a way to try to balance out what have been historical inequities. But now, I think it's easy for people to forget what those historical inequities have been, and they only see what they see now.
Right. You know, I grew up in a family where my mother and father are very liberal, always vote Democrat, and my brother and sister are very conservative. They'll vote Republican regardless of their values or views. As long as they have a Republican next to their name, they're voting. I was in the middle. I loved going to visit them during holiday break, and here I am in the middle, listening to mom and dad with their liberal viewpoints, and brother and sister with their conservative viewpoints, and honestly, I get it. I hear both sides, and they both have valid arguments about whatever subject they're talking about. I personally have been an independent voter for years and years. I chose not to take a political party. I'm a registered independent, and I'll vote for whoever makes the most sense for me. I do my best to put politics aside and just say, you just hear their viewpoints, and if it resonates with me, then they got my votes. If it's something that I feel they're stoking anger or stoking fear for whatever reason, then like I feel like I could see through that. And it's good to be an independent, and I feel more people should be ditching their political party. I think a lot more peace would be getting along on this planet, let me tell you.
Well, asking people to give up their
I
political
know.
affiliation, I mean, it's
That's right.
because,
It's not gonna happen.
it's like a family membership,
It's how they identify themselves.
Yeah, it's like a tribe, and everybody wants to belong to a tribe. And so it's really hard to think that people are going to just give that up because, one party may be behaving badly in the eyes of somebody else. Well, you
Right.
care how they behave in the eyes of somebody else. You may even like the fact that they poke the other side.
Right.
You may like the fact that you may like the fact that these stories come up that are just horrible stories about what the other side has done, or what the other side won't do, or what the other side has said, because it just makes it easier for you or me
Mhm.
to hate them. It
Sure.
makes it so, and sometimes hating just feels good. I mean, it's like we're told it's bad, hating is bad, not forgiving is bad, but sometimes when you are so angry at something, or so angry at somebody, it's like in Star Wars, where the Emperor says, or Darth Vader says, let the dark side wash over you, Luke." It's like it's easy to let it happen. But, it's like that quote. There was a quote by a famous Secretary General of
Is
the
it Ahsoka Tano?
No, he was a Secretary General of the UN, I think it was, and he said, if everybody believed in eye for an eye, then the world would go blind.
Sure.
It's
a good quote.
So letting yourself be taken up by hate over assumptions, I mean, it's easy and it's human, but it doesn't really get us anywhere.
Yeah, those who jump the highest push the world down the furthest. And I just made that quote up right now, but it sounded good. It's often been thought that rural America is pretty much all white. But the fact is, like, over 20% of rural America are people of color who are also critical to the economic future of the small towns. It should also be recognized that smaller towns are totally undervalued, yet essential for a prosperous America. Food production, energy creation, carbon sequestration, and habitat resources, those are all so valuable, and each one of those factors plays an important part in keeping a strong America. And
I wanted to mention, you said habitat restoration, and I used to work for a federal agency that had to work with a lot of people in rural communities, and we had to work with a lot of cattlemen, and we had to work with a lot of ranchers, and we had to work with a lot of hunters and fishers, and they would say, your environmental policy, well, they weren't really our policies, we had to work with the Fish and Wildlife Service, because in a lot of situations where we were involved in some kind of NEPA action, and for those of you who don't know, NEPA stands for the National Environmental Policy Act. Whenever the federal government is involved in any kind of work that involves anything to do with the environment, there has to be this big process that involves the public and partnering agencies. And the agency I worked for had to follow the rules of the Fish and Wildlife Service whenever it had to do with a NEPA action involving the natural world, landscapes, rivers, anything like that. So there were plenty of times when you know, we would have to have public meetings, and the people who were fishers and hunters and ranchers, they would say, we don't need your environmental laws to tell us how to take care of the land. We've been working on this land and living this land and using this land as a part of our life for decades.
Mhm.
We don't need the federal government to tell us what to do, you know? And that's where the rural-urban divide can happen. It also can happen, I think, sometimes when you have people who live in the city and they see how people in rural areas, you know, how they live their lives, you know, whether they hunt or whether they fish, you know, they run farms, you know, and they have to butcher animals for sale or for private use. And, you know, they think, oh, that's so awful what gets done to those animals. And on the other hand, you know, it's like, no, for the people who live there, that's just how they live.
Right.
And this clash between the values of people in rural areas and the values of people in urban areas really has a lot to do with each side not really understanding, you know, for instance, how the food chain works, you know.
So do you feel maybe creating trust, like by educating, like an equal platform of education spread out, or?
Well, it would depend on how you create that platform.
Right.
You know, because right now we're in a situation where in Florida, the governor has pulled books off the shelf because in his view, those books indoctrinate kids.
Sure.
You know, so I mean, it's very difficult to get a government to agree to send a message to both sides of the urban-rural divide and have both sides be willing to actually read it.
Right. Everyone has such strong opinionated viewpoints that to connect this divide, again, can seem almost impossible, but this right here, this is gonna be a tough one to recognize. But in my view, opinionated political news stations, they are meant to divide us. Those news stations, regardless of, I'm not gonna start mentioning any station IDs, but in general, all political news stations on all aisles of the spectrum, they are meant to divide us. Opinion-based news stations, they brainwash viewers, in my view, telling them how to think. They have a financial gain to divide folks. When a company can garner 50% of the population to trust them, that's huge. That's huge. And their commercial sponsors, they know it. They know it. So maybe, you know, I'm not telling people to stop listening to their favorite political news station, but maybe don't take it so seriously. Like, how can we create trust amongst country and city folks? Don't take opinionated political news stations so seriously. And the same goes for your favorite politician. Policymakers benefit. They benefit when a state is divided. And if that, you know, and if it's time, maybe it's time to start electing more independent voters. Like, you're gonna hear me often saying that, like, I feel non-affiliated or independent affiliated voters is, you know, an important factor to help calm a divide.
You know, one of the things, you bring up a lot of really good stuff to talk about. A lot of the interviews that I did, I also talked to a lot of judges. And you know, in Oregon, judges have to be nonpartisan.
Sure.
Okay, in order to get on the bench, you have to be nonpartisan.
Are there really nonpartisan judges though?
And you know, that's a question I asked almost every one of them, because I thought, you know, you have to run for office. How can someone who runs for office be nonpartisan? Because, you know, once you get on the bench, your views become clear pretty quickly based on the decisions that you make.
Right.
So it's really, I mean, the public must look at that. I'm pretty sure the public looks at that and says, okay, well, there's an NP in front of their name, but that doesn't mean that, you know, somewhere else there's not a D or an R, you know. So electing more nonpartisan people in office, I'm not always sure that's exactly the answer, you know, because you don't really know how people are going to respond until they get in the seat. Like all the Supreme Court justices that were elected during the last administration that swore up and down that Roe versus Wade was settled law, and as soon as they got in there.
Right.
So, you know, we already know that what people say and what they do is not always the same thing. Getting back to the news stations for a second, you know, I'll mention them, NPR, On the left, even though NPR would swear up and down it's not left, it by every indication, by everybody except NPR, they're left. And Fox News on the right. And you know, listening to these stations, you know, they each present a point of view that is very tailored to their audience. Outside of mainstream media, you have people like Tom Hartman on the left, you have people like Joe Rogan on the right, and those folks aren't affiliated with networks per se, but they do have huge audiences. And you know, the people who listen to Joe Rogan would say, Tom Hartman, he's just brainwashing people. And the people who listen to Tom Hartman would say, Joe Rogan, he's just brainwashing people. Sure. There again, there's that difference in perspective. I mean, to say that all the Joe Rogan people are crazy Confederate flag waving liberals is just wrong. And for all the Joe Rogan people to say, all the Tom Hartman people are just Antifa loving, right, you know, black power activists, you know, who want to, you know, steal our children and take our women, you know, it's like, okay, see, that's not really helpful either.
Yeah, you know, I've listened to both Joe and Tom. Joe and Tom should actually create a show together. How would that go? But point being.
Now see, that would be a good idea for bridging the urban-rural divide. That would be a good idea.
So, exactly, I love it. Are you guys listening? Let's do it. But I've listened to both of them, and I've heard their viewpoints and what they have to say. And honestly, like, I get where some of their viewpoints are coming from. It makes sense. And here's what I'm gonna say. On a daily basis, folks move out of rural and into the big city, and vice versa. And they become neighbors with someone who could easily be a total drinking buddy. Your potential new friend lives 200 miles away and can soon be your friend. It's time that we stop hating on one another and recognize that we have so many things in common. Got to put the hate aside, put the harsh rhetoric aside, and start just accepting and creating the trust amongst one another.
You know, and something else. I mean, I know that these subjects that we talk about, they may sound very. I mean, somebody out there with a much broader knowledge of politics and history and economics than us may listen to us and say, "Oh, these two are so simplistic." But you know, sometimes the simplest questions, the simplest statements can start conversations. And you know, when the country was being founded, it was being founded by people who were farmers. These were people who, you know, weren't highly educated people, but they decided they wanted to start a government. You know, now the people who sat in the constitutional, what was it called? The Constitutional Congress, the Congressional Convention, I can't remember. But the people who actually put the government together, they were very smart people. But the people who followed them, the farmers, the Mr. Smith goes to Washington type folks, these were people who, you know, had a very basic understanding of government, and they appealed to the people who they were representing. So it's not like, you know, we aren't aware of the fact that, you know, some of these subjects we talk about are very complicated. But I guess what I'm saying, and I think what Kevin is saying, is that they're not beyond us.
Right.
These are not subjects that we are not able to talk about, and these are not solutions we are not able to find.
And that being said, we know you have thoughts, and we would love to hear some of your questions or your views on creating trust. And you can always email us at countrydogcitydog@gmail.com. Share your thoughts, and we might just be reading it online. So thank you so much for tuning in and listening to us. My name is Kevin Levy.
And I'm Don Merrill.
And we look forward to our future episodes with you.
Good.
Great, man.
Yeah, what do you think?
Oh, I loved it. I would say for our first time ever, two almost strangers coming together and just being able to just do this for our first time ever, it was great. Because it reminds me of, and I'm laughing out, it reminds me of being in a brand new band, which I've been in many. Our very first band practice ever, it'll sound good, it'll be good, and we'll get our point across, but the more we start doing it, the more comfortable we are, and we're gonna start feeding off of each other. And we're gonna like, our back and forth is gonna be more like fluid and natural, and then it's gonna really start like I loved it. Today I thought it was great, especially for our first one ever.
Yeah, I think we did really good.
But again, as a band becomes more cohesive, like we're gonna have a lot more back and forth. We're gonna get to know each other's like ins and outs and the vibe, and it'll be.
And I think a lot of times we'll agree, and a lot of times we'll disagree. But I don't think the agreeing doesn't have to be a love fest, and the disagreeing doesn't have to be a fist
Oh,
fight.
my favorite part is when you disagree with anything. When I say something, if you like counter it, love it. I'll never be like, why did you do that, dude? You're embarrassing me. Never. Like I want you to like.
And I liked it when you asked me questions about my own personal experience, because it's like, yeah, living in Beaver Creek is very different. I don't know if I told you this, but when I lived a couple of years ago in Beaver Creek, I did tell you this, there were like Confederate flags all over the place.
Yeah.
Like Confederate flags flying, and someone, this is very interesting, so, there happened to be a topic that OPB was talking about. They were talking about, and this was around 2016, 2017, they were talking about, not exactly racism in Oregon, but they were talking about like the urban-rural divide, I guess. And I posted a comment. I said, I live in Clackamas County. The question was, do you feel safe where you live? And I posted a comment like, I live in Clackamas County in Beaver Creek, and I do not feel safe. And I said, I have 3 Confederate flags like within a mile of my house flying. And do you know that within a month, all 3 of those flags were gone?
Really?
And these were flags on private property. It's like all 3 of those flags came down.
Wow.
And they had been up for months. So, I mean, I don't know if someone in Clackamas County listened to OPB, and sort of, I don't know what happened. I just thought it was a really weird coincidence that all 3 of them came down, like within a month.
Sure.
Just
remind me, my only potential, and feel free to like share your thoughts, that you may or may not want to edit out is when you called out NPR as being who you perceive they are, would potentially prevent this show from ever getting on NPR.